But you do get, accelerated depreciation that can accrue to shareholders, etc. I'm not an expert in U.S. tax law, but it does seem that the structure has some definite tax benefits. I may be wrong. I can't stand behind some of these statements. I indicated off-balance sheet financing, although that's coming into question because of the new international accounting standards, and particularly the rating agencies. The rating agencies say, I don't care what the standards are. The fact is that you're accumulating a contingent liability that we're going to put in your books as we rate your provincial or state debt. So rating agencies are getting a bit worried. There's the issue of the borrowing capacity, and so basically, with very little equity, the government has the ability to take on a lot of projects at once. So we fired up a lot of projects that would have never been able to be done under the traditional method. And then we have risk limitation, and that is the risk is really limited to the amount of equity invested. The equity is always at risk. You can spread the risk through some sorts of joint ventures. So the equity holders may be some sort of joint venture. You've got long-term finance. You've got enhanced credit. For example, if you bring in a Johnson Control or Honeywell, what happens is because they have a AAA credit rating, it means that the bondholders are willing to give you a better debt. So the credit rating of your participants is very important in this. And then equal partnership. The structure, what I mean by this is that it requires less equity and allows the developer to have equal partnership. So the developer can step into one of these partnership arrangements on an equal basis, but they may not have a lot of equity to put in. I know I'm going quickly. The big disadvantage is it's really complex. All of these contracts are all intertwined. All of the credit support is indirect. So you have to have contractual commitments rather than direct promise to pay. So it requires a yield premium to compensate for this risk. So for example, if something goes wrong, I can't force you to pay. I've got to go and get it from an insurance company because you've insured that risk. So any claims against credit become somewhat complex. And the transaction costs can be staggering on these deals. That's why people feel comfortable at $1 billion. Same transaction costs for 50 million, basically to $1 billion. So sometimes you want to pool things like we're doing with the schools, where we pool 15 to 17 schools in one package. I just sort of listed, Dan, I'll take the word net out, put it in present value.
You can use that.
Yeah. If you look at you've got your capital structure, you've got your dividend policy choice. How do you pay your equity? You've got negotiated debt contracts. You've got fundraising from private funds. You've got a whole what we call agency theory, and that is that in a sense, the SPV is working as an agent of government, and that brings into bearing a whole other set of laws. For example, in our building, at our Schulich building, we have a contract for food services, and it's an agency. We pay them a fixed sum every year, plus a percentage for good performance. And so we have to be careful. We call that an agency relationship. And it brings into other factors. The big issue you get into, for example, in our case is who holds the liquor license. If they're agents, is the university liable for it, or are they liable? So agency relationships have sparked contingent claims and resolving financial distress. So you can see that, again, in project finance, there's a whole set of tools and techniques that come into play. We use it in power, gas-fired, coal-fired, hydro. We use it in transportation, mass transit, concession agreements, sometimes 50 years or more, like in airports. They may be very long. Social infrastructure, hospitals, prisons, administrative buildings, courthouses. We use it on water supply and wastewater. We're now using it more and more on wastewater treatment because we find municipalities are not very capable of designing them, and the PPP model seems to be coming in. Telecommunications, I mentioned Britain's spy satellite, fixed telephone lines, fiber optic cable, cellular, depending on the number of concessions in the market, and we find it in developing markets in various forms, but there's always the question of foreign exchange risk in some of these. Natural resources, it's been used in oil, in gas, and it's been used to build pipelines. So it's a big, big industry worldwide, huge. I don't know why it's not particularly well taught. I guess it's because it's not a sector that MBAs have traditionally got into. That would be my suspicion. It's a very technical business of building refineries and oil pipelines and so forth. I won't go into it. So there's two parts. We can get, let's see if I skip that. No. So we have the equity capital, and in Canada we have equity fund managers. We have a firm, Fengate, we Innisfree. We've got a whole bunch of these who go out and gather pension fund money and operate as relatively smaller SPVs. And so the equity they have is that they've accumulated pension fund money from a lot of the smaller pension funds. Then we have the big ones, the big pension funds. I mentioned Canada Pension Plan, OMERS, Ontario Teachers, Case Depot, and in the U.S. You have CalPERS. Who else is the big? I know CalPERS is TIA, correct? TIA, correct? Yeah. And the fact is that these all develop, unlike equity fund managers. These people have to have technical expertise because these people have to be able, in this case, quite often, they have to build a financial model. Most of these people may put in some equity at the development side, but to a large extent, they're just standing waiting to, eat the meal once it's cooked. And then the industry sponsors, the GE Capital, Enbridge, a lot of these people come in and put equity as a price of getting in the deals. So even the contractors will now put equity into the deal. Because they're saying, we want some, the SPV is saying, we want you to have, quote, skin in the game. And they're also saying, well, I guess if we get closer to these people, our chances of being treated better, our chances of having a better role in that structure. So many of the sponsors are putting in money, such as the construction firms. You do get some mezzanine debt. I don't know much about this in the infrastructure side. Up until until the crash in November 1980, the banks were the largest providers of project finance. And they did it they would finance, and then they would do it by selling corporate bonds. You do get some multilateral and export development banks. We have a bank called Export EDC, Export Development Bank of Canada, who will provide loans to some emerging economies to help. They're doing that in Chile. Canada's just loaned money to do a PPP to build the new airport in Ecuador. Lo and behold, the Canadian construction firms building it, and Canadian architects are designing it, etc. So, you know, there has to be some good reason. Many projects have a credit profile of triple B or double B, and banks usually have a good skill at pricing low investment grade. And banks have traditionally, I don't know about here, but our banks do almost all construction lending. But I'll come back and tell you what happened there. The bond market, I'm going to talk about this, most of the financing now is coming out of private placement bonds. And the bonds are typically investment grade in the range of A to triple B. And the fact is that you're locking in. I'll come back on the bonds. So there's two types of equity products. We have ordinary shares. So in other words, for every dollar, you get a share. And then secondly of all, they're shareholder subordinated loans. And so in a sense, the equity is subordinated to other debt, and you would get equity distribution by way of interest or principal in your payment, almost like a preferred return. And I want to go back. I won't go all through this now, but because if I show you the bucket, it'll make more sense. But the equity providers get distribution only during the operation and maintenance phase. There's no equity payments made before final construction. So the equity providers get nothing until substantial completion. There's no event or default or step-in events that the equity holders have no right to step in. Only the debt holders. No drawdown on debt service reserve. So in other words, they cannot tap the debt service reserve. All of the bank accounts of the SPV have to be fully funded at all times. And everyone else gets paid before the equity holders get paid. Now, if you're going to build your model, and in our financial course, they actually have to build a model and just go through the exercise. And so, if you were doing it, you would see that you've got no history. You've got to make assumptions as to what the world's going to look like over 30 years. So you have to look first of all at macroeconomic assumptions. For example, what's the traditional CPI? What am I going to put in here? Is it at 1.5, 2? Is it 3.5? But you've got to make some macroeconomic assumptions about the health of your economy, with or without a government. You've got to look at your capital expenditures. What are all of your hard and soft costs, your advisory fees, your administration fees? What are your bidding and development costs? What's it going to cost you to bid this project? Now, you may get some of that money back at time of financial close, because now you got money, and you may be able to take some of that money and pay some of your costs. You've got your development fees. You've got your project company costs. You know, you are going to have staff, administration, all of these people, particularly during construction. You know, if you're doing $1.5 million a week in construction, you've got a big staff overlooking that. In this particular Humber, we had 7 tower cranes on the project. Now, as soon as you can get one of those off the site, you're going to do it. But, and that's expensive equipment. You've got your construction subcontract, which is a DB. You've got your working capital. That is the difference between payment of the project company's OpEx and receipt of revenues. You've got your reserve account, you've got your interest, and you've got your contingency. So when you build a model in Excel, you've got to take all of these inputs and work them out. And then you've got your operating and maintenance costs, and you've got to work out. So the model first has to identify the cash flow components, and you've got to differentiate between the money coming in and the money going out. And then you've got to look at your principal, all of the costs in terms of your obligations. How much has to go to pay down principal and interest, how much to reserve, how much to dividend. And the difference, it's like dealing with REITs in a way. What's it called, FF&A or whatever, but you've got what the difference is called your operating cash flow. So you take all your obligations, and now you've got, and I'm going to show you the waterfall. It's much like structured finance. Weight of each category will differ depending on the project's current phase. So that's how it works. I don't know if you know much about do you know much about structured finance? No? You do. It's very similar, right?
It is, yes.
What you do in structured finance is that we call it the waterfall. And so just assume that these are buckets and this is water. So the first thing you do is you have to fill this bucket. And that is, and whenever once that bucket is full, the water flows into this bucket. And then after you've paid your operating and maintenance charges, anything left over goes to insurance. So insurance is told that it's in third place. Of course, they'll say, we'd like to be in second place. Now, and then anything left over pays taxes. Anything left over pays your increase in working capital, and then anything left over goes into your capex. And so that's how this income works. And there's another one following this I'll explain. So you have to set up this model, and hopefully, okay, after all of this is done, then you've got what's left over to pay your capex costs. So this is kind of the dynamics of the model. So this is your construction phase, and it means that your biggest cost is going to be here. So if you're